Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Infuse Your Future podcast, where we bring together people and ideas who are making the world a better place. I'm your host, Dr. C. And I'm excited to announce our guest today, Claire Doherty, and her business name is Claire Doherty. And the way she inspires people in business is she supports them to reconnect with their bodies and intuition, tap into their innate power to heal, and help people uncover their unconscious patterns. And she does this with archetypes, so that when we make the unconscious conscious, magic happens. Who doesn't love magic? Yeah. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Claire. Hi, Claire.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on the show. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the world?
Thank you. So I'm an intuitive guide and a coach. I've got a training in the Western medical model. So I was originally a physiotherapist. I still am a physiotherapist, actually. Been doing that for nearly 30 years. And I have a master's in health ergonomics. But I'm also a nutritional therapist and a medical intuitive. I've studied medical intuition, transpersonal psychology. And so I kind of bring all of these things together when I have a person in front of me that's struggling and comes to me for help. And I draw on all of my different tools in different ways to basically help them. And one of the main ways that I work is energetically with archetypes. So when somebody comes to me with either a health issue or a life challenge, so, maybe they're feeling blocked or they're not feeling very confident or they're experiencing anxiety, then I'm able to connect in and to see which patterns, which archetypes are maybe underlying this, and then help them to become aware of those patterns and to make some small shifts so that they can come into maybe a more balanced position or move towards their goals, whatever they might be.
I love that. For those of us out there who don't know what an archetype is or haven't heard of that, would you mind explaining what that is and what that means to each of us?
Yeah, sure. So basically they were made it was a term that Carl Jung actually gave to sets of patterns and actions, and he saw archetypes as being these kind of sets of actions and patterns that existed within the collective unconscious, so we all have access to them, and we've all got archetypes. If you basically think of them as labels for characteristics and actions, so a mother is normally somebody who is very maternal. A teacher is somebody that shares information, that kind of thing. A people pleaser is somebody that can't say no and loves helping other people.
I see.
Yeah.
So what are the common archetypes that you work with?
Well, and anything that comes up, but I mean, we all have similar ones, and then we all have our individual ones. So similar ones that we have will be things like our child archetype, because we were all children once, and we'll all be a daughter or a son to someone, for example. So we've all got some common archetypes. We've all got within us the saboteur archetype. We all self-sabotage in some form or another, whether that's through procrastination or through perfectionism, and so when I'm helping people in their business that either don't feel very confident or they don't feel that they can create and share their creations with the world, I'm kind of thinking, okay, so what's going on with their saboteur archetypes? Is it that they don't feel perfect enough? Is it that they're feeling or believing that what they're creating isn't valuable enough, isn't perfect enough? Or are they just procrastinating for whatever reason? And why is that? So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, those I can see you being very busy with people pleasers and perfectionists.
Oh yeah.
And procrastinators.
Yeah. And so many people say I'm not a perfectionist, and then when we kind of start to unravel, they kind of go, oh, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And the people pleaser is huge, especially for women, actually, because as women we're primed to be good girls and to be agreeable and not to say no and to put other people first. And of course, you know, we do all have this maternal natural instinct as women, even if we don't have children. Most people, you know, will have some kind of maternal instinct, and by that I don't mean that they want to necessarily be a mother to something, but you know, they're creative and expressive and sensual. All of those things are maternal, parts of the maternal archetype. And so we're kind of, you know, primed to believe that we should just be really good girls and agree with everyone, and that then becomes a hardwired pattern, which when we get later in life we don't even realize that we're doing it, but we can get really overwhelmed and burnt out because we're so busy taking care of other people that we don't remember to take care of ourselves, and we actually think it could be quite selfish to put ourselves first. So yeah, I see a lot of women with that going on, and having to kind of unlearn that pattern and then challenge it and ask, is it actually true if I take this time for myself? So yeah.
Yeah. And our society, of course, breeds those archetypes, right? If you're not perfect enough, you're going to get fired. If you don't please the people that have power in your life, then there's going to be negative consequences. If you try to set your boundaries, I think so many people are people pleasers for whatever reason, you know, whether they're groomed for that by family or society. But you know, there are real negative consequences for not being those things. And when you try to set your boundaries, because there are so many perfectionists and people pleasers, the result can be pretty intense.
Yeah. I mean, people don't like it when you suddenly start to have a boundary and you say, actually, I'm not going to do that. They're kind of like suddenly, oh my gosh, you're being really selfish. You've always done this. What am I supposed to do? You know, and they try and kind of put it back onto us with a bit of guilt so that we will go, oh yeah, I'm such a bad person. Of course I'll do it. So it's really interesting watching that dance when people start to put a boundary in place and to kind of say, actually, I am going to look after myself first. But it takes strength and courage because, of course, we can upset people sometimes by saying no. But you know, that always makes me question, and I always invite the person that I'm working with to question, what is your relationship like? What's it based on? And where is the respect actually if it means that you can't say no? You know, what's going on there?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And that's one of my big things in my life and in my practices is the boundaries. Because if you think about it, when you first start setting boundaries, you're also not that good at it, right?
Yeah.
And you can tend to be kind of crass or rude. And so it's just learning that dance of how to set the boundaries and how to set them respectfully, and also respecting other people's boundaries as you're setting your own.
Yes. Yeah. Such good points. It's so true because, again, people often think that when you're setting a boundary that you're being confrontational and you're on, you know,
Right.
and so there's that fear. And the other thing that I find is that people over explain a lot. No, I'm sorry that I don't want to do that because of X, Y, and Z, instead
Mhm.
of just saying, you know, thank you for asking me, but no thank you on this occasion. Or, you know, people don't understand that they can say, I know I've been doing this for X amount of time, but I've reviewed things, and going forwards I'm not going to be able to do it anymore. However, you know, I'm going to stop doing this in a week's time or 2 weeks time, and that's perfectly fine. That can be a middle ground if you feel you can't stop straight away. So it's often helping people to kind of find a way that they're comfortable with setting a boundary, but without apologizing for it, really.
Mhm. And it's also interesting. I have teenagers and they're trying to set their boundaries, but they don't always realize that, you know, parents also have boundaries. So
Yeah.
the boundaries can clash sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I've got one teenager and one older son, but I've been there. I'm still there a bit.
Well, I'd love to talk to you more about the saboteur archetype because I think that hits a lot of us, especially women.
Mm,
I mean, definitely men have their own challenges with archetypes and their own challenges with how society grooms them, which I think
mm,
is cruel in many ways, how society grooms men.
yeah.
Um, but the saboteur archetype, it's just so deep and so prevalent. So would you like to talk about that a little bit deeper?
Sure. I mean, so there's that you can self-sabotage with any pattern actually. So, you can self-sabotage by wanting to be perfect. And actually, what is perfect? Do we ever reach perfectionism? And I mean, that's the whole paradox of it, isn't it? Because you can't reach it, so nothing's ever good enough. And who decides what's good enough? Is it you or is it somebody else? So, there's normally a small voice in the back of our heads that is speaking to us about not being good enough or it not being perfect enough, and that is often a voice that we've stored from earlier in life, whether that's a teacher or a parent or a sibling, but somebody. We've internalized this belief that we need to be better and be more perfect, so that often trips us up. But we can self-sabotage with the people pleaser or being codependent, or the addict is another massive saboteur. And I actually really, really like the addict archetype because I think it's really complex, and I think it's one of the most misunderstood patterns in society. And people are not very open to considering that maybe we've all got slight addictive tendencies and that it can be a spectrum. And I have this conversation with my children about social media and being on their phones. And that they do admit, they do say, oh, it is addictive, mum, it's really hard. But I think we all have addictive tendencies, and some people more than others, and we can be addicted to anything. So that can be behaviors, the need to people please. It can be substances, it can be all sorts of things like shopping, or gambling, or buying, collecting things. And there's nothing wrong with it, there's nothing right with it, it's just what it is. But it's serving a purpose, and it's serving the purpose of managing our emotions and our feelings. And that's what we need to remember with compassion when we are faced with somebody with addiction, instead of it being this really horrible stigma that we label somebody with, oh, they're an addict. Well, we've all got that within us, the possibility. And if we could just be a little bit more compassionate with people, then that would be more helpful, I feel. But it is a huge saboteur archetype, because of course when we're spending our resources, whether that's time or money or energy, in that addiction, rather than focusing on something that's more supportive, or something we want to achieve, then of course we're not going to achieve it. We're going to just be staying in this addictive pattern. So yeah, I really like the addict as an archetype, just because I think there's so much to get into with it, and I think it's so misunderstood that I have so much compassion for people who have got addictions to anything.
I love your passion and compassion about addiction. And there's so many things about what you just said. So one is balance, that addiction can be a positive thing, because you can be addicted to positive things, but you just want to do them in balance so that they're not overtaking your life or creating a negative effect from whatever it is you're addicted to. Because some people are addicted to work.
Yeah, the overworker archetype,
Yeah.
absolutely. Can't not kind of be at work, or be at work at 9 p.m, or be constantly answering emails and whatever. And that's really interesting in itself. Well, what's that about? Is that because there's something going on at home and we don't want to be at home and we don't want to be present at home? Or is that a need to feel valued and valid to somebody external within the workplace, or even to ourselves? Or is it actually just because when we're really busy, we don't have time to look at ourselves? So yeah, really interesting.
And I also love your message about being compassionate towards addicts
Mm,
or people with addictions. One of the programs that I went through was the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching. And what I loved about that is they really talked about how there's no good and bad behavior. There's just behavior based on how we needed to survive as we were growing up. And a lot of
mm,
people with addictions, those are just things that they acquired as as a way to exist in the world, as a way to
yeah,
survive, or they're covering up some deep trauma so that they can just get through day to day.
yeah.
To really have compassion, not label them.
Mm,
Because I don't know about the UK, but in the US for sure, if you go into the mental health system, it's all about diagnosis, diagnosis,
yep,
diagnosis.
yep.
And when you work with a trauma recovery coach, or any, trauma informed healer, it could be a therapist, a coach, when they understand that it's not about diagnosing, but just about supporting and nurturing and helping that person learn other survival techniques to replace the ones that are destructive, it brings the relationship into a whole new dynamic. Because when you go to a doctor and they're saying, well, you're an addict, then you feel like you're a helpless child who's doing bad things in the world and you just want to
Mm,
hide. But when you're meeting that person as an equal and saying, I'm really sorry, whatever you went through that caused you to create these um, patterns, like you said, an archetype is a pattern. I'm so sorry you had to create these patterns just to survive. And
mm,
I'm here to hold space with you and work with you to help you create different patterns,
yeah,
maybe aren't so destructive.
yeah, yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that a lot of people have the view that that addiction is a choice, and that people
Right.
can just easily kind of stop, or they chose this. And the other thing that I found really interesting is the whole which came first, the substance or the addiction. And my belief and my experiences is that actually, even if that substance didn't exist, or that ability to kind of shop online till midnight every night from 2 in the morning, from 6 in the morning, or whatever, if that didn't exist, there'd be a different addiction that would fill the gap. And for me, it's about that, having that empty hole that needs filling with something. And addiction, that's what addiction is. It's a self-soothing pattern, which is also destructive. So yeah, I just think there's so much misunderstanding around it. And I think that's why I feel quite passionate about helping people and about trying to explain different perspectives. But I love what you just said. I think that's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think, at least for me, and I think this is true for most people, but obviously I can't speak for other people. When we think of addiction, we're thinking alcohol, cocaine, heroin, but probably the biggest addiction in existence is food. And
Yeah, I
so
mean,
many,
definitely. Yeah, is one of them for sure. And
yes.
that's actually either not eating food or eating food. So even anorexia is an addiction, because it's an addiction to not eating.
Ah, I
Yeah,
like that viewpoint.
yeah. And it's slightly different. It's kind of, rooted in the need for control. But it's also an addictive behavior, which is why it's very difficult, to break out of it. But food, definitely, and I do help lots of, and it's again, it's more women, but there are men as well, who turn to food as a source of comfort. And of course, we're brought up, aren't we, to see food like that. We're rewarded with food when we're young. We're punished by not being allowed to have certain foods if we've done something that our parents, don't agree with. And food forms this centerpiece for so many of our cultural celebrations. If you think, Thanksgiving and Christmas time and Easter, birthdays, all of those things, weddings where we feast and we celebrate. And so, of course, when food is connected with something that's happy and comforting, we want to go to that when we're feeling distressed and not very nice about ourselves. Yeah.
Right. And especially in the US culture, it's just so much fast food, so much, the holiday that I hate the most is Halloween. It's just
Okay.
candy, candy, candy. And oh, you know, my kids are still trick-or-treating, and my daughter brings home 2 giant pillowcases full of candy.
Wow.
And the teachers give out candy for rewards at school all the time. I know when my daughter was in elementary school, one of her teachers would literally give out a full-sized candy bar as a reward.
Wow.
And I
Oh,
was
gosh.
just so frustrated. And as a mom, there are times where I wanted to reward my kids with like an ice cream or something like that. And I never felt like I could because they were getting so much junk from school.
Right.
One time
Wow.
my son came home and, well, actually, one time I was talking to one of my friends and found out that for probably 6 months, she was packing an extra sweet in her son's lunch to give to my son. It was like a giant, they call them honey
Boys.
buns, I think. So unbeknownst to me, every single day for 6 months, my son had a giant little honey bun at school.
Wow.
And my friend was trying to be very, giving and generous. But the reason I didn't pack sweets in my kids' lunch was because our family has a problem with food. And I know they're getting a bunch at school. And so for me to add that on, it just felt terrible.
Oh, bless you. I mean, what a sweet friend to do that for him. But oh dear. I don't
Yeah,
think in the UK, teachers are allowed to give out sweets in the classroom.
they're not allowed.
No, as far as I know, certainly at my son's school, they weren't allowed. So I think
Oh,
that's
that's
pretty
good.
standard. Yeah.
I think they were trying to implement that at the school my children went to at one point, and they were getting a lot of pushback, both
Yeah.
from the teachers and even some parents.
Well, I'm sure if that's been the norm for so long, it's difficult to change. We don't like change, do we? And as a tool for rewarding and getting children to have a good relationship with you, I'm sure for a teacher, it's a great thing to be able to do.
For sure. For sure. It all goes back to boundaries and balance,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, what kinds of people do you work with?
All sorts of people. So and people normally come to me when they're struggling with something and they just want support with space holding or unraveling anxieties or problems that people feeling stuck, people with confidence issues, people who are anxious. I work with couples as well, so relationship issues, and then people who have health issues, obviously, who might come to me with a specific health issue that's going on. Because the way that I see it is that our patterns manifest as symptoms in our bodies. And so we're co-creating our life all the time. And partly how we do that is with our actions and patterns. Now, that sounds quite obvious. You know that if you smoke and drink a lot, you are more likely to develop certain forms of cancer, or all forms of cancer, actually. But I'm not talking about just health related patterns. I'm talking about people pleasing. I'm talking about codependency. I'm talking about those kind of patterns. So, for example, I tend to see a lot of people with gut issues and digestive issues, and people who are people pleasers do present with more gut issues. So how I see it is that people pleasing is overstepping our own boundaries. And when we have gut issues, there's normally sort of some issue going on with the boundary of the gut. So it's what's happening inside of us is being reflected outside of us, and vice versa. And so I get people who come to me are really interested in that kind of thing, like the metaphysical meanings of the health symptoms and what they might be able to do other than the bog standard healing things that they might be doing, like their diet, or seeing their health practitioner or doctor. What else can I be doing? What else might be going on? Because I see health issues as being multifactorial and having kind of layers to them. So yes, they're biological and they're physiological, but they're also energetic. And so they have a metaphysical meaning. So yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I feel like when you mentioned the gut, it was all kind of tying in. I'm wondering if you have any advice for people. We're coming up on the holidays, which is so full of all of these negative patterns, the people pleasing, the eating too much, the wrong foods, maybe even the drinking too much. Do you have any advice for people that are going into these big social events and trying to change their patterns?
Yeah, I think firstly, be compassionate with yourself and be realistic. So, if you know that you are going to be tempted and that you're going to go in there and have a drink or eat that food that you've said that you're not going to have, cut yourself some slack and allow yourself to maybe have a little bit of it at that time, because you're much less likely to eat all of the food and all of the drinks if you've allowed yourself a little bit of it. And I always say to people, each meal time is another chance to reset and to start again. So you don't even have to wait till the next day or the next week. You can start the next meal time. But of course, this time of year is just rife with all the triggers that set us off. So we do reach for the drinks and the food and, the self-soothing behaviors, because family dynamics can be particularly triggering for some people. And I say to people, do you really need to put yourself in that position? And why is that? And that's huge, because often underlying that is a belief that if I don't go to this family function and do this thing, everyone will think that I'm really awful. And I'll also think that I'm really awful. And I need to go. And the family thing is absolutely huge, because it immediately transports us back to when we were small children. So we're reliving all of those patterns and all of those triggers. So it may be that people have to be honest with themselves and put some boundaries in place and say, do you know what, I'm going to come, but I'm not going to stay for the whole thing. I'm only going to pop in for this amount of time. Or they might come and they might have thought, actually, this person normally says this to me, and this is the thing that really triggers me. So I know they're going to say it. So instead of me being upset, I'm just going to kind of try and go, oh, I was right. They said that to me again. And have some kind of like management system, I think, in those situations. But really, it's about being compassionate with yourself and knowing that actually it's okay to get upset. It's okay to eat the food. It's okay to have the drink. It doesn't mean that you failed. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It just is. Yeah.
There's a man named Daniel Amen. I think it's either Amen or Amen. And I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's done a lot of work in brain studies. He's a psychiatrist who's also a radiologist. And he gave the example of when he was growing up, I think his grandfather or someone owned a bakery, and they were always, eating yummy food, and they were all overweight. And so when he was first trying to set his boundaries, he would just not eat as much. And when people were, because his family was very into eating. And so at one point he finally said to someone who had asked him for the third time, why don't you eat? He just very kindly said, why are you continuing to ask me to eat when I don't want to eat?
Yeah.
And that seemed to help him.
Yeah. And I love that, actually. Because he's not being rude, is he? He's just kind of being curious.
Right, being curious. That's another really great tool.
Yeah. And I think people, particularly with things like alcohol, that are kind of like these social crutches. I don't know what it's like in the US, but over here it's very much kind of like if you go out then and you're not drinking alcohol when you go to a bar, it's kind of like, or you go for dinner, well, what do you mean you're not drinking? And people are kind of like, oh, come on, have a drink, have a drink. And it makes it very difficult. But I always say to people, what you're not understanding is that those people that are wanting you to have a drink are doing it so that they feel better as well. Unconsciously, they're wanting you to be the same as them, because that's what we want. Human nature is we want to fit in. We want everyone to be the same, which we're not. So not drinking is a really, really interesting thing to try and implement, I think.
Oh, yes. I have a personal experience with that when I was in college. I would go to these parties and they would want me to drink, but I was never a drinker. Maybe I'll have one and that's about it.
Mm.
And I remember there was so much pressure. So finally, at one point, I just started taking water shots and they thought it was vodka.
I
So
love
they were
that.
happy. I was happy. I was just shooting water all night long, hydrating. We all had a great time. So that's the
Brilliant.
trick is, you can have a glass in your hand. Maybe it's just Coke, and then you tell people that it's rum and Coke or,
Yeah,
whiskey
yeah,
and Coke. And
yeah,
then, you're just going around having a fun time with them. They think you're drinking, you're
yeah.
not drinking.
I love that. You have a little secret that I've got no alcohol in here.
And I guess even the same with food is you could walk around with a plate of food and then just
And
nibble on it here and there
yeah,
instead of,
absolutely.
constantly going back and filling up the
Yeah,
plate.
yeah. And some people are feeders though, so they get their comfort and passion through feeding other people. And so sometimes they don't mean to pressurize us to eat. It's just how they actually show us that they care and they love about us. And I, the gentleman that you just mentioned, that
Yes, Daniel
Alan,
Amen.
yeah, that's lovely. That's why I love that he questioned and he was curious about that, because I wonder what the answer would have been. I wonder, would it have been, well, it's because I love you and I'm showing you my affection. And I wonder what that answer would have been.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Another thing that you can say is, I'm really curious why you want me to eat this so
Mm,
badly when I don't feel like eating it.
yeah, yeah.
But it is going to take practice to be able to do it and
Oh
say
yeah,
it without rubbing people the
yeah,
wrong way.
yeah. Because
And
people do become offended, don't they? That you're not taking the thing that they're offering you. It's a
right.
dance, isn't it? It's a tricky dance between, not offending and having your
Right.
boundary. Mhm.
Right. So true. So true. So if people want to work with you, how do they find you? And what does it look like to work with you?
So I work with people one-to-one, and I also run training courses to teach people how to work with archetypes, how to read archetypes energetically, and to do the work that I do. So it's basically, interpreting how an archetype is turning up in a body as symptoms. So I have a practitioner course for that, which is a year long. People can contact me through my website, which is clairedoherty.co.uk, or I am on Instagram, which is claire_Doherty_alchemist.
And I'll put all these in the show notes. So if you want
Great.
to reach her, you can go there. And you do mainly one-on-one, and is it pre-recorded sessions or is it group sessions?
For my classes, they're all
Yes.
live. So
Oh,
all of
okay.
my training is live in person. It's all on Zoom, but my course is accredited by three international bodies. So if people pass it, then they can get insurance to practice the modality anywhere in the world, and they can register to become a coach as well, a behavioral change coach. So yeah, I show up every week and I teach, and I love it.
That's awesome.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything else you would like to say during our time together?
I don't think so. Just to remind people that, you're always enough, and, you don't need to be better than you are, because you're already perfect as you are. What is perfection? I mean, does it even exist? But just know that you are that thing.
I love to have a call to action at the end of all my episodes. Do you have a call to action that you would love to ask people to do today?
I think really it's just kind of having, I love to get people actually to think about how their body has supported them that day. So to sit down and to think, actually, what has my body done for me today? Whether it's my legs that have held me up, or my feet that have taken me somewhere, or my, lungs that have never stopped breathing because I've never had to ask them to breathe. They just automatically do it. So I like to get people connecting in with their bodies and just noticing, how is it that my body has supported me today? I'd love you all to do that.
That's a great exercise. Yeah. All right. Well, it has been a great conversation. I could talk to you forever about some of these things, especially the curiosity. We didn't touch too much on that,
No,
but that could definitely be a whole conversation.
yeah, it could. I agree. Thank you so much. It's been so great.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great week and happy holidays.
Yeah, same. Thank you.
Bye.